David is here. Can I get an approval of the agenda?
Second.
Did you get that? Brief announcements from staff.
You vote. You need to vote. You need to vote.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Anybody opposed to the agenda? Thank you. Thank you. We'll muddle through.
Sorry about that.
No, I appreciate it. Staff announcements?
Yes, we actually have a couple of announcements. So one, I wanted to introduce Karen Sangera, our new finance manager, to the commission.
Hello. Nice to meet you guys.
She just started a couple of weeks ago, but I wanted to make sure you guys can put a name and a face together. So she will appear at the commission once in a while and probably do presentations, so don't be surprised. But she's the new finance manager for the department. So, congratulations, Karen.
So her title is finance manager,
Yes,
and she reports to you?
yes, she does.
Okay. So your staff is growing, or is that a replacement?
Well, it's a replacement of a now vacant position that's been vacant for, I want to say, close to a year since the time we hired. Well, yeah, like 10 months.
Been
Yes.
so long, we forgot.
Yes, unfortunately, we had to go through a recruitment process 3 times to actually get through and get a qualified candidate. So,
Congratulations.
so I wanted to mention that, and another announcement, just to kind of more of letting you guys know, because that was brought up by the chair, is to kind of give you more of logistics. If somebody wants to bring up an item to discuss, so when we had the conversation with both the chair and vice chair, if any of the commission members would like to bring out something and place it on the agenda for discussion, please contact the chair or vice chair or myself. Let us know, and we will work through to place an item on the agenda. This way, we'll make sure to coordinate everything. So if there's an item of interest, particularly if it's a discussion topic, it has to be on our regular agenda. If not, we can always have some of the discussions, but not in details, I will say, for items that are brought up during the long-range calendar. But if there's an item that you all would like to discuss or would like to bring it up to the full commission, please let us know and we will place it on the agenda. We would like to ask you to provide some more details because we do have to put in a description what type of information we're going to talk about, if there are any actions to be taken, so that type of information. So if you can provide it to us ahead of time, we will make sure to include it on the agenda. Did I summarize that all, Steve, or if
No, that
anybody
was
else
great. Any questions or concerns? So I think there was a little bit of misunderstanding of what it took to sort of bring something on. Your explanation helps, and nobody should feel stifled whatsoever. So that's great.
Great, and those are my announcements. Thank you.
Anybody here have anything at this point? No? Great, we'll move on. Any public comments? Either here or, yes, looks like we do. Great.
Hi, my name is Barbara Clutter. I'm co-chair of Interfaith Housing Justice Davis. And we're a coalition of over 10 faith-based organizations, and we advocate for equitable housing solutions for the unhoused, renters, and first-time homebuyers. We promote inclusive, sustainable development for long-term housing stability and opportunity. For decades, people of color and Jewish communities were systematically denied home ownership, as you know, creating segregated neighborhoods like College Park and Estee Manor here in Davis. While redlining and segregation are now illegal, the resulting economic disparities and lack of diversity persist. So I urge your support for the down payment assistance program. I think you'll be hearing a report on that maybe later tonight. Many families in Davis qualify for income restricted homes, but they can't afford the down payment, even though they can manage the monthly payments. This program would help break down those barriers to home ownership. Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Georgina Valencia. I'm a member of the Planning Commission and a past member of the Social Services Commission as well. And thank you for your service. I just wanted to present myself so you could put name to face. I heard that earlier this evening. I am a professional. My business is real estate, and I've had quite a bit to do with affordable housing here in the city of Davis. And I understood there was going to be an update from a subcommittee on down payment assistance that council had asked a subcommittee be formed. So I wanted to present a couple of documents that I thought might be helpful as resources, as well as myself. And one of them, and I sent them earlier this evening to all of you, is the housing element. Our current housing element has an appendix in it, Appendix A, that references the Housing Trust Fund. And the Housing Trust Fund is a mechanism for funding housing programs, as well as there was some proposed programs in the Housing Trust Fund, and that might be a good resource as you're doing your work. The other item is something that was presented both at Social Services and also to Council, and I sent the document, and it's the first-time home buyer program. It was developed by community members, along with myself, professionals in the industry, and was provided as a proposal to kind of get I'll say the impetus going on consideration of the down payment assistance program and how to fund it, and that is the Housing Trust Fund. So thank you. And I'll leave this with staff just in case somebody wants to reference these documents as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any written comments?
The only comments we received, which were sent out to full commission, which we've acknowledged, was from Alan Hirsch. And also Georgina when she sent the email, so no other comments received.
Okay. Then we'll move on to the consent item, which is approval of last month's agenda. Any objection?
Approval of prior month's minutes.
Minutes, I'm sorry. I told you we were going to muddle through. Anybody opposed to approving the minutes from the last one? Okay.
I need a motion.
Motion to approve.
So,
All in favor?
aye.
Approved. Okay, and I think we're at the wastewater fund update.
All right, just give me 1 minute to get this pulled up. All right, for those of you who have not met me yet, my name is Adrienne Heinig. I am Deputy Director of Public Works, Utilities and Operations here in the City of Davis. And today I'm here to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is wastewater. It's so much fun to talk about, and it often is one of those utilities that not a lot of people know the ins and outs of what's involved. And this is one of those great opportunities for us to get in front of folks and really share what it is, the work that we're doing with our utilities, our unseen utilities underground on a regular basis. So the reason why I'm here is twofold. One is we have regular fund updates that we'll bring to this commission for all of our city utilities. And if we have a utility that has an approved, what we would call a rate calendar, so there's approved rate adjustments for a fixed period, then we would also come before this body prior to that adjustment, that annual adjustment, and just say, hey, this is what we're looking at, this is what we see as the need for the utility, do you agree? And then that information would be taken to City Council for them ultimately to make the decision to implement that next year rate adjustment. So that's why we're here tonight. So we're going to learn more about the wastewater utility and then talk through the need for an adjustment for May 1st of 2025. The interesting thing about this update is the year that we're reporting on is the last year of rates that were not adjusted. So they're not showing the adjustments that we made when we were able to implement our current calendar.
The current schedule started June 1, 2024, and will continue through May 2028. Our wastewater fees are adjusted once per year in May, and they're adjusted to reflect winter water use average for the previous year, along with some other things that we'll get through as we go through the information for tonight. When we do a cost of service study, which is the result of why we have this schedule now as a previous cost of service study that we did, we also have an opportunity to not just look at the financials of the utility overall, but then also how we're charging those rates for customers. And that's a really important thing for us to do on a regular basis, because things can change, technologies can change, the best methodologies for how to charge for those rates can change. And it's a good idea, on a regular basis to be able to check in and say, okay, do we see a need here? And wastewater actually represents a really good example of that. In 2017, we adjusted the rates specifically for customer cost allocation, not for overall financial increase or decrease, because we had had a major update, I was going to say revision, to our wastewater treatment plant. And because of those treatment plant changes, the cost of treatment changed. So we needed to make sure that that was being captured appropriately in customer rates. So that's an example of when we would look at a rate structure in addition to the overall financial for that utility. In the last cost of study service, or last cost of service study that we did, Steve will know, we adjusted the balance between fixed rates and variable. So there's two components of our wastewater rate. One is fixed and one is volumetric. And the volumetric is based on that winter water use average. Previously to the study, those are about 50-50 for customers. It was 50% volumetric, 50% fixed. On the whole, wastewater charges tend to be more fixed than other utilities. So we did shift that to 60% fixed and 40% volumetric. We also condensed the number of customer classes that we had, both for housing and for commercial. We implemented a new rate for dormitory style housing where you have 8 or more beds per unit. And then we added ammonia as a calculation of strength as part of that volumetric charge that we charge our customers. And if there's a question, you can stop me at any time.
I have a question.
Yes.
Could you explain sort of the reasoning behind adjusting from 50-50 to 60-40 and condensing the classes? What is the rationale behind making those?
Sure. So like I said, the wastewater charges on the whole tend to be fixed, largely fixed. The amount of the utility that you're using doesn't necessarily proportionately impact the cost of actually processing the wastewater. Most agencies do have a higher level of a fixed charge for wastewater. Some are fully fixed. There's no volumetric component. And so that was part of it, is looking at, this is a more fixed utility than others. Let's look at maybe shifting these costs to a bit more fixed. It does allow for some additional reliability for the utility, moving it away from that volumetric proportion. For water, for example, there is a lot more connection to the amount of water, and so that one is highly volumetric and would stay that way. Reducing the customer classes, in a lot of ways, is both, it's a benefit for the city and also for the customers. We had so many different classes, we had 24, I think, commercial classes, that it would get pretty confusing. And so we were able to condense them into basically low, medium, standard, and high strength. And there's more flexibility between those classes, which benefits the customers as well, because there's an opportunity for, let's say, a dental office, well, not dental office, let's say a nail salon that doesn't have, an acrylics service. They wouldn't necessarily fall into an immediate category, so we'd be able to figure out exactly where they are. And there is more flexibility. So that was part of the benefit of reducing those classes. For housing, pretty much the same. There wasn't a difference between the cost for the different types of housing, so it made more sense to condense them into single family, multifamily, and then that dormitory rate. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so as we're talking through our fiscal year 24 information, the things to keep in mind that are sort of the upcoming considerations, the things that are actively happening right now, are summarized here on this slide. So of the utilities that we have, wastewater is going to be one of the most challenging in terms of equipment and capital improvement projects and wear and tear. Because you think about, it's not just water that's going down those pipes, there's other materials that are going down those pipes, and sometimes those materials are very corrosive. And so there's a lot more turnover in equipment than you would necessarily expect, certainly in something like a water utility or a stormwater utility. And that's just generally overall. So there is earlier equipment replacement that can be necessary than maybe some of our other utilities. We also have a number of large planned upcoming projects, including replacement of some of our sediment tanks and then our sewer lift stations that are going to be big ticket items. I don't know if you do know, but the way that our system generally works is through gravity sewer. So everything comes down via gravity, and then we have lift stations at strategic places to bring that material back up and then get back into that gravity sewer. Really good example of what can happen with wastewater is something that's happening right now on Road 105. I don't know if you follow the city on social media. If you don't, you should, because there's a lot of great information on the fact that we have a closure up there because of a sewer main that did break. And that is definitely, you don't want to break anything, but definitely not a sewer main. And so that is going to be quite a large project at this point. In addition, we have some earlier than we anticipated work that we're going to need to do on some of our larger projects that can put some stress onto the fund. So let's get into the fund itself. We have it broken up here by revenue and then by expenditures. So for wastewater, when we talk about wastewater, we're really talking about three different funds that are sort of the wastewater fund collectively. And the sources of funds go into sort of two buckets. The first bucket is going to be the revenue for the charges for cost of service, because wastewater is an enterprise fund, so the fees pay for the service. But also, we have customers that are inside the city and customers that are outside the city. So within our service area, it also includes Macero, North Davis Meadows, and some other places. And then we have, fees and leases and other things that will kind of fall into that revenue bucket. The second one we have is going to be what are called connection fees. And that's when we have new projects that come online, they pay in order to be able to connect to the city utilities. The rate structures themselves, currently we have a fixed base rate for all users. We have a flat per unit charge for residential customers. So if you have the main house and you have an ADU or you have a duplex, you have one for the main house, one for the ADU. We have volumetric charges that are based on that estimated wastewater demand by calculating your winter water use average from the previous year. And then there is a strength determination that I have a little bit more information here on the slide and definitely go into a bit more depth in the staff report that you received. But using the calculation of the material that will come from the property and to the plant based on the customer class that we would expect to see that strength from. That's where we're going to land on that charge. And I don't know if you know, but we have one charge in the city bill, but it's actually three different charges that are combined, or three or two, depending on if you're residential or commercial, to make that rate. So like I said at the beginning, we're in the middle, or at the beginning, of a rate adjustment period. So this slide, it is small, it is in the report as well. Shows the currently approved adjustments from June 24 through to May 28, in addition to a sample calculation. Because like I said, we have a few different charges. This is a residential calculation, so it will show the three different numbers that would combine to make the rate that you would see in your city bill. Okay. So for expenditures, there are so many things involved in wastewater that are not just pipes in the ground. We have, of course, the plant itself. We have the collection system, which is the pipes in the ground. That also includes the lift stations and the other pieces of equipment that we have to make sure that material keeps flowing and it keeps flowing smoothly. We've got a laboratory out at the plant. We have regulatory programs that are required by state and federal law including a pre-treatment program. So for some of our industrial users that might be doing really fun research projects, but they're producing really nasty things that would not be great to have into our wastewater system, we have the ability to have special agreements with them to make sure that that material doesn't end up at our treatment plant. In addition, we also have required testing for any effluent that comes out of our plant to make sure that it meets quality standards. We also have the beginnings. We're working through a recycled water program. We're very excited about it. We're going to be able to recapture some recycled water for beneficial reuse. We're still in the process of that. And then, of course, those additional city overhead costs, including the utility billing that's performed by finance, among other things. So capital improvement projects, like I said, the most volatile component of our program. There are so many things that can impact the capital improvement projects. Recently, of course, we've had a lot of issues with supply chain challenges, the cost of things going up. So there's a lot of volatility there. And when we have the general sort of smaller projects, we can get through those with cash in hand. But if we have lots of larger projects potentially coming up, that's when we might look at potentially a loan or some kind of bond to be able to fund those, rather than look to the ratepayers. So this is a chart of our current expenditures or I should say the expenditures for fiscal year 24. And you can see, that capital improvement is going to be the biggest difference between those two, the budget and our actuals. This is also in the staff report. In addition to our operations expenditures, we also have our debt, and we have what we have is our enterprise reserve, right? So the debt is, we only have one loan for wastewater, and that was taken out for the update for the wastewater treatment plant that was completed recently. And then the reserve, as it's currently set by policy, it's 3 months of operating expenses, which is standard, 5 years of planned CIP and average, and that becomes your sort of emergency reserve, and then 5% of annual operating revenue. And so that's sort of how the reserve itself is captured. On average, it's about $9 million annually, but that includes the debt coverage that we would also pull into that. All right, so one of the reasons why we conducted the cost of service study and we moved forward with the rate adjustments is looking at one of the key indicators of health that we have for our utility funds, which is going to be that revenue expenditure balance. So when you have a utility fund with a balance between how much money you're taking in and how much money you're spending, you're able to maintain that healthy reserve. When you start to shift that a little bit and you see more expenditures and you see revenue coming in, you're going to eat through that reserve very quickly. We don't want that to happen. As part of the study that was conducted previously, we did know that there was going to be a few years where we'll be dipping into our reserve because we had some one-time large capital improvement projects coming up. And we are seeing that, but we do want to make sure that we are maintaining, we're recovering that balance between that expenditure and the revenue. And so this is showing sort of where we're at right now with actuals. And then that next chart that we have shows where we will be if we have the 5% increase to be able to show that recovery for the fund. So we know we have planned and unplanned activities that are ongoing. We want to make sure we can restore that balance between our expenditures and our revenue, and then moving forward with those larger projects to keep debt lower. So our recommendations for this evening, approve the staff recommendation to move forward to City Council with that 5% rate adjustment from May 1, 2025. And then we'll take any conversation that happens this evening. Depending on the outcome, we'll go to council in April, and then we'll see what happens then. Any questions?
Yeah, I've got a few. And I think what I want to understand has to do with the breakage of the main.
Okay.
So we didn't expect that to happen. Somewhere in our future, we had planned to do some maintenance replacement on that. It's in the budget. It wasn't in the budget for this year. So we take other items that were budgeted for this year and we defer them so that we can pay for this.
Mhm.
So that when we look at sort of where we were before we can pay for it. When we look at where we were before the breakage and after the breakage, we get to this balance fiscally of being able to pay for it. But we're in a riskier situation because we've deferred some things that, in a perfect world, we thought needed to be done today versus sometime in the future. And my question is how do we reflect the risk? We don't change the reserve calculation. How do we think about sort of we're getting behind? And I'm not suggesting we're critically behind. I don't know, and that's what I'm looking for is an understanding of sort of how adequate are our reserves and our rates relative to the capital needs that seem to always get deferred. They never get done sooner. They tend to always get done later.
There are, like I said, to the point of the planned and unplanned, it's a very good point that yes, there will be things that are deferred. There are other reasons why projects might take longer than anticipated, right? And so any good plan is going to keep in mind that things aren't always going to be on time and under budget. And so that is something that we try and build into those conversations. But certainly, when we are looking at the potential of deferring things to make sure that we can cover an emergency, that we're going back and we're revisiting those things and figuring out, okay, when can we move forward then? Because certainly they were there for a reason, and we want to make sure that we can move forward. And we try to do that look as soon as we can. But we also do those funds or the cost of service studies every 5 years or so, right? So we have an opportunity to check in a relatively short period of time and say, okay, is there a different way we need to be looking at this? The reserve policy is something that we could also look at in terms of, does there need to be an adjustment in how we're calculating for that capital reserve? That's certainly something we could do.
One other question. And I think it's in here, and I can't find it. I didn't understand it the first time I read it. What is our loan capacity? How much can we borrow, or how much is it the specific utility that borrows for?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then what's the borrowing capacity for the waste treatment system?
So generally, what is going to be a metric that we would look at is we have to make sure that our revenue would be 1.1 times our annual debt coverage. So what would that payment be based on the size of that loan, the revenue coming in? And if we're not able to meet that threshold, then we would not be a successful candidate for a loan of a certain kind. But it also depends on the type of loan or the type of bond that you're looking at in terms of what that would.
Is there a reasonable worst case scenario where enough stuff breaks that we don't have the loan capacity to deal with it?
So generally speaking, if you are issuing a loan, that's I guess a good and a bad about utility, or any utility really. It's funded with rates. So your rates, then you have to raise rates if need be, if you do have bonds or loans in this case. These are long-term loans like bonds that are just being issued through the state of California in our case. But by, in essence, allowing to borrow the funds, it also gives the ability to the utility to raise the rates in order to meet the required coverage. So in some cases, we have to do it, and that's required by a bond coverage, as an example. So the capacity is going to be when the original bond is issued or when the city wants to, a utility in this case wants to do so. They go and look at it and it will be determined because you will have to set the rates in a way where it will cover, it will provide necessary coverage. They will look at capital improvement plan, what's coming up, how much will be spent. So they're looking at how much the borrowing capacity is based on the plans we provide for capital and what's the capacity for the rates is. So it will depend on a variety of things, but studies is usually what has to be done, and as Adrian mentioned, every 5 years because it's long enough but short enough in order to react.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions, and this first one is maybe more like a process question, but I see that like the recommendation is to approve a 5% increase, and I also see in the report that the 5% increase is already approved, it's like a pre-approved rate. And so I guess I'm trying to figure out like is there discretion to not, if it's already pre-approved?
Yeah, so when council sets the rates, that 5-year rates, so we say 5 years for every utility that goes through a majority protest process, you can set rates for 5-year terms. For a utility where you go through a ballot process, like our stormwater, that is set in perpetuity. So that's the reason why we have that different time frame. But yes, when the rates are set, they're set for earliest and most. So that would mean, and there have been times that we've come before commissions or we've come before council and said, you know, we're doing the calculations, we're seeing the numbers, we don't think an adjustment is necessary at this time. Or we've had times where adjustments have been deferred, and that's okay because the schedule that was set by council when they approved it was earliest and most.
So the recommendation now is to do it basically earliest
As
most.
Yeah, as laid out in the schedule for this time, we are recommending that we would move forward with what was set.
Okay, thank you. Another question I had was in looking at the staff report, on that table that shows, it's on page 4 of the report, on that table that shows the fiscal year 2024 revenue, there's some like big deltas between the projected budget and the actual city accounting for other revenues and for the capacity fees. Would it be possible to explain kind of what those big differences are?
Sure. So other revenues can be inclusive of interest from investments. And as of the drafting of this report, that information was not available for us. So it's possible that once that is there, you will see something closer to what we have budgeted. The fun part about capacity fees is that development is relatively challenging to predict in this community. And so we can have anything from a couple million to maybe 92,000, in any given year. So it can be, that one is definitely one of the more challenging to predict for sure.
So for that one, we tend to project conservatively and then if, okay.
Yeah.
I see. Thank you.
I just had one question. It's about the debt service. It looks like we pay, is it like $2 million about that we paid for the debt?
Yes, and that is inclusive of principal and interest.
Okay. I just wanted to understand, like, what's the timeline we have for paying down the principal, or is that something we know? Does it keep getting added to it as we take out more? Like, is the plan to continue to just take out more?
We have, oh no, so this is a discrete project. The loan is representing a discrete project, which is concluded. So the process of sort of gaining those monies to be able to conduct the project is done. And we have a schedule, it's, I want to say 30 years, that has for every year what that payment is, that we already have as part of our agreement for taking on that loan.
And just one follow-up, do you happen to know when the 30 years is over for this particular project and sort of the plan?
Not immediately in front of me, but I can find that out for you.
Thank you so much.
My turn? Thank you. I just had a couple questions to try to better understand this, and then I have a suggestion for the staff report that goes to council. So just to follow up on the earlier question, so I'm looking at page 4 of 8. So actually, we landed total, this is where you have the 2024 revenue. Your budget projection at that time coincided pretty closely to the end, to the actual. Right? And then you have a comment here that revenue was close to expectations, which is typical of this way. So that's been the track record.
Yes, it has been a much more predictable revenue stream than water, for example.
Okay. And the reason is because that volumetric charge doesn't vary as much as you get with a water rate structure?
Certainly. During previous droughts, we might see a dip in the wastewater revenue because there is that water use component. And we have much less than we would see in water. Water, for example, is 80% volumetric. And up till this point, wastewater was 50, so definitely a difference.
So I'm trying to highlight a success because it looks like you had a very close match. So I think that's one of my suggestions, to make an explanation why that is more likely to happen with the wastewater utility than the water. So that's a small suggestion. Next question, follow up on, I'm trying to know exactly what you're asking us to do, and I know you explained it and follow-up questions on it, but you have a rate adjustment by year to 2028, and we're just and that's been on the rate study, and that's set, and that's been approved, but you're asking us specifically to approve the adjustment for this year?
So, great question. Yeah, we're only here to talk about recommendations for next year. And we will be back next year to talk about the next year. So you'll get very used to seeing me on a regular basis to talk to you about wastewater and stormwater, so that'll be fun. But yeah, it's only for that year, and it's a recommendation to council. Council ultimately is the approving body.
So this, if the council approved it, and we're asking to make a recommendation, so we make that recommendation to approve, we're talking about 2026?
We're talking about 25.
2025?
Mm-hmm.
And that adjustment, if it weren't approved, then that graph that you showed previously where the income stream's getting out of line, so that's why you're asking for this?
Yes.
And if the answer was no, you would expect, if we recommended no, which I'm not going to recommend no, but if you recommended no, then you'd have more of a disconnect between, right?
It would be dramatically different when we come before you in March of 2026.
Okay. Well, I think I understand that now, so thank you for explaining that. And then I have a question then moving up to the report. So it seems to me the whole issue that you have is on these rate structures is who are the winners and the losers. Maybe everybody's winners, but you have a rate structure, I'm looking on page 3, where it looks like there was some changes that were made, and it goes on to page 4, where the structures were last time condensed for multifamily. You went from 10 to 1 according to this, and then you developed a new rate structure for larger dormitory style housing, which I believe now is it's per bed. Is that okay? So
Yes.
was that considered a major change at the time?
That was a major change at the time. Previous to that, we did not have that type of rate, but we did have an influx in housing that was larger occupancy than would be standard, because you would have 8 or more beds, per individual unit, which was a unique situation.
Yeah, so this reflects a little bit of Davis's approach to land use, where we're getting more dense and higher structures. So we changed that then from what previously was in a multifamily class into a dormitory class. And was that done in 2024? Do we have any sense in your study as to whether that's been effective in what we were, and I'm not sure the policy here, I guess the policy is to try to better make sure that these large dormitories pay for their fair share, the beneficiary pays principle?
Exactly the phrase I would use. So we're under an obligation to make sure that our customers pay for their fair share of the use of the utility. And so we wouldn't have one customer class subsidizing another. And if you do have a much higher occupancy for what would be a multifamily unit than would be expected, it's important that we would have a rate that would reflect the fact that there's going to be a greater strength of material coming down that wastewater pipe from that unit.
Okay, so during this adjustment with the addition of the dormitory per bed, then some of those other classes then they were then reduced. They were paying less. The dormitory per bed was ideally picking up a higher share because it had a greater impact.
We have, I want to say 3 of those types of apartments in town. So whether it was a substantial difference, I wouldn't be able to say offhand, but certainly we would make sure that each customer is paying their fair share.
So that's one of my other suggestions, and I'm not sure if this is the right time to evaluate that change. It may not be until at the end of 2028, which is the last time period I see that you have it. But if it were possible, to provide some feedback to the council about that change, I think that'd be helpful, because it showed, some good thinking on the part of city staff and trying to recalibrate these classes. So I have one more question, Chair, so let me just, more of a suggestion. So my other suggestion for the report is you have the expenditures that are associated with this wastewater charge, and I would be interested in connecting that charge and that revenue to exactly what is the city getting more concretely in terms of staffing, capital improvements, how much you rely on outside contractor. I'm not sure of any of that. I see you have it on page 5 of 8, kind of budget and actual, and you have different categories: debt, capital improvements, regulatory programs, division operations, department overhead, and overhead. I would think it'd be helpful to council. This is exactly what we're getting. These are how many employees we're getting. Now, maybe that becomes part of their budget process. And,
Yes.
And it becomes, this is not what you're asked to do here. But I think it'd be a good reminder to show, hey, this is what you're getting for this payment, and this is the kind of functionality we get with our treatment service.
Absolutely, and in your report and also in the reports that we share with council, we have a document called the Wastewater 101 document that was created actually a few years ago, and we regularly update that, and it does exactly that in summarizing with some really fun pictures how many people we've got, what type of procedures we have, what the lab does, the wetlands. There's a lot of great information in there.
Okay, I have to dig into that's what I have, Chair. Thank you.
Anything else?
Yeah, sorry, just one last follow-up. I was wondering, because like in California, we've made accessory dwelling units and other policy changes that are trying to help ease the housing crisis. Is there any progressive form that we're doing these changes in that are trying to advantage housing justification, or is there, that's not something that goes into these calculations at all?
No, the initial calculations that we do are the cost of providing the service and the minimums of that standard of service. And then the adjustments that we do after we determine what that cost is the allocation per customer. There's really not a lot else that can go into that to ensure that we are charging that proportionate fair share. The state law absolutely prohibits any rates being used for any kind of subsidy.
Okay. Thank you.
Are we ready to propose a motion?
Public comment? Do we have public
I don't know.
comment?
You do need to take public comment, yes.
Okay, is there any public comment? Thank you. Okay, help. We're gonna get the whole room. Is there any public comment? No.
Steve, don't forget.
Can I get a proposal? for-
Yes, I will. I'll make the proposal that staff's recommendation to the council be approved, namely that it be adjusted by 5% according to that rate adjustment calendar, with the first adjustment occurring in May of 2025.
Can I get a second?
One second.
Anyone opposed? Great, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, that's very, very helpful. Okay, let's move on to the presentation on infrastructure. Thank you.
No.
evening, Commissioners. I'm Diana Jensen. I'm the Director of Public Works, Engineering and Transportation, and I'm also the City Engineer. And what I'm going to go through today is really more of like an educational tutorial on how we develop our capital improvement projects budget every year. And then after I get through that, then I'll do just a really brief overview of our pavement management program, since pavement is a large capital project. This is a PDF, okay. So what I'm going to go through today is kind of the timeline of our CIP budget process. What we do, I call our non-call projects. I'll explain that later. How we update our CIP sheets. I'll show an example of what a CIP sheet looks like. Kind of go through the process of how new CIP projects are developed, and then go into that council approves those CIP projects with the budget. We put together a funding table for finance to use after we're done creating these CIP sheets. And then, as I said, at the end, we'll do a brief description of the pavement management program. This is a bit difficult to read, but this is kind of my CIP budget timeline. In the summer, what we try to do is a schedule update. We do a project schedule where we show the life of each project. There's sometimes a study that we do. There's design, we put it out to bid, and then we award the contract. There's construction, and then there's closeout. So we try to track those different components to make sure that we have staffing available for each phase. And then coming into the fall, this used to be called our call for projects, but our staff is so incredibly busy. We really hope every year that there's no new CAPs. So we call it our non-call for projects. We kind of have to do it. We have to let people know that we're getting ready for the budget. And we always get new ones. I mean, it's just the way it is, but we're not looking for more work. So I want to make that clear to all of our asset managers. So we send this out to Public Works, Utilities and Operations, which is the water, wastewater, storm drain facilities. And then we send it to our Parks Department, and we send it to every department head, but those are our main categories of CIP owners. And then usually in the early part of the year, we will first try to update the sheets for the existing projects. So we have projects that often span multiple years. They're just big projects, so it can take a long time to design, and then you move into the next phases. So, typical project, a quick project might be a year. More typical can be up to 5 years to get through that process. So we update the sheets that are still moving forward, and we may or may not need more budget. If we've asked for budget early on and done a good job of estimating what we need, sometimes we don't need to ask for more, but I still like to show those sheets because they're still an active project. And it will show the total project cost each budget cycle. So then we create the sheets for the new projects, and this is just developing a new CIP sheet, working with the asset group to determine the exact scope of the project, and doing our best to try to figure out how much funding we're going to need. This can be really difficult because we don't necessarily know a lot about what the design is going to look like. We don't typically get better numbers until we're at about a 60% design. So we do our best, we put out a number, and then that's why these have to be adjusted sometimes every year. For all the new CIPs, we meet with the city manager and explain which are the new ones and what the asset group has told us is their priority. And then he will look at that and make a recommendation of which of those he thinks needs to move forward. Then we double check with finance and see, do we have enough funding for what we're proposing? Because we have an idea of what our funding might be, but we don't necessarily have the exact numbers. And so we try to wait till later in the year when finance might have those numbers more accurately, and then we check with them before we put something forward to council with the budget.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yeah.
So can you take us through the conversation of how you decide to defer things or not defer things because there is a limited budget?
Yeah, it really depends on the specific project and the need. There are some, like facilities projects maybe, that we just can't put off because, you know, the roof is leaking and it's damaging the interior of the building. Those are high priority, right? There's other ones that, you know, maybe we're wanting to redo the lane widths on a certain street, and before we just go in there and redo all the striping, the street might really need to be rehabilitated too, but it's not falling apart yet. You know, if we have really no money for that project, that might be delayed a year or two. There's nobody in danger, it's not, you know, damaging anything at the moment. So we really look at each project individually and what problem it's trying to solve.
How do I know there's not a day of reckoning when everything was sort of, we've deferred, and now we can't defer anymore?
You know, it is always a risk, and I think it takes the staff who's experienced and been doing this for a while to make those recommendations to the city manager so that he can, you know, understand that a lot of thought has been given into what CIPs are a priority and which aren't. And we do studies I would say about every 5 years, where we'll have a analysis of like all the facilities come through and like what are the critical needs for each city facility. We do, and I'll explain with the pavement management program, we do a survey every 3 years for some components and every 6 years for others, where we look at how we're doing, and that determines what's going to get paved in the next 3-year cycle. So we try to do, it's pretty iterative. I mean, we do a lot of, you know, taking the best knowledge and putting forward our decisions based on that. And then it goes to, after finance, you know, agrees that we may or may not have money, that final list goes back to the city manager for him to approve, to put it in the budget for council to make the approval. So it's a recommendation by the city manager to council with the budget that we add those new CIPs. So my non-call for project, I explained this a little bit. Here's the email to the asset groups we put out, the different departments. We receive responses back. Sometimes there's no new projects for a specific department. Other times there's quite a long list, and so if there's a lot, then we may have a little back and forth with the department trying to figure out their priority and how much funding they think they have. So that can be a little bit iterative, and that's the meeting with key personnel if needed. So that takes a little bit of time sometimes. So here we update the CIP sheets, we update the existing ones. We have a new GIS-based app that our GIS manager created. We used to do this all on Excel, and it was very clunky, and you had to make sure you had the formulas right, and it was really difficult to use. And so he created an app for us where we can just plug in our numbers, and then he does all the calculations kind of behind the scenes. We do spot check, you know, several of them just to make sure the calculations seem to be going right. We did that initially when he created the app, and it does seem to be functioning very well, and it saves staff a lot of time. So that's what we use now to create our CIP sheets. And then we create the new CIP sheets for the new projects, and then what I like to do, if we have time, is send those projects, those CIP sheets in PDF form to all the asset groups and say, here's what we think you told us. Can you please take a look and make sure that we got it right? And here's what we think your priorities are. So when we send it to the city manager, we're communicating that clearly. This is an example of one of the sheets. Maybe I can blow this up here a little bit. So each CIP sheet does have a number that's for finance and for us to track it. There's, I like to keep track of its last revision date because there's a lot of iteration on these projects. I want to make sure we capture, we changed it after our last conversation, so I kind of track that timing. Who the asset owner is, who the Public Works engineer is that manages the project, have a project name. This name matches what finance has in its system so that there's no confusion. And then we have a description of what the project is. And we try to, as much as we can, answer, what, why, how, and when, kind of. We don't necessarily have great information sometimes at the beginning of how we're going to do it, because we haven't done design yet. But we do try to make it clear why we're doing this project, what the need is. And then we like to show location so that it's understandable if you're reviewing these sheets and you're wondering what we're talking about, where it is. Sometimes the location helps. And then the second sheet goes into the funding. This is showing what the funding sources are. We put that up front so you can see first which funds we're pulling from. This is our cost estimate. And so we have a construction cost estimate, and then we have these other, which you'll hear this called soft cost. And so these costs include whatever the planning and study cost was, if there was one, the engineering and design cost, and it goes through the different components that we have to account for when we're putting together a budget. And then down here we look at what the 5-year funding plan is. And so we try to figure out, we look at what was spent on this project in prior years. We look at the remaining budget on that date that we're looking on this sheet. And then we look at what we're asking for, what the next budget cycle is requesting. And then we have the totals over here. Oops. Out of whack. Okay. So the new CIP projects then, we go to the city manager, he reviews them, we go through what the priority list should be, finance does review them all and determines if funding's available, and then based on that information, the city manager will recommend something to move forward to council. So the CIP sheets, we do like to put them in the proposed budget. We think it helps council figure out, what we're talking about. And then at first introduction, council may ask questions about the CIPs, so we'll follow up if they have specific questions, make changes to the sheets if necessary, and then that goes in when finance comes back to council for approval. This is an example of the funding table that we create for finance. So here we just list the CIP, we do the number, the title, and then this is all the different funds that the city uses for CIPs. And so we just make sure that we're showing where those funds are, and that helps finance. This is a huge table, so I didn't include the whole thing. But at the bottom, there's a total. So when finance is going through, they can look at the fund that they're questioning. So it's a fairly quick comparison for them to see what, we're asking for versus what they have available. Sorry, I keep doing that.
Is that table you just showed in order of priority?
No, it's just in order of the CIP number, just so we can keep track easier. And then, yeah.
The table is usually for the projects that have been already recommended by the city manager to the council for approval. So it lists, so original list may have been longer or shorter, depends on, what it starts out with. If extra funds are available, some of the projects might be added. If it goes the other way around, then we might have to figure out, or Public Works with individual departments, they may figure out, okay, we don't have that much available, what is the priority of what you have submitted? And usually, as Diana explained, starts earlier on, so they already have an idea by the time the conversation with the city manager happens.
I see. At what stage do the CIPs become publicly available? Or are they mostly for to work things out internally, and then when it comes up with the budget?
Yeah, so when the budget is published, they're usually in the budget. So anybody can go to the budget document and look up, you can search by a name, if they're wondering what's going on in a park, they can search by that name and go to that budget sheet and look at it.
And our budget book has a component specifically for capital improvement program. So all the individual sheets for each project is there. As Diana said, finance, those are the sheets that we live by, and that's the ones that she just showed as an example, because we need to know what fund is paying for what and how much. So those are the ones that we cherish. But Public Works has the full detail, including the kind of like a 5-year projection. So the current budget plus maybe extra 3 years, depending on the type of project.
And then, so what happens with us is, so we have our kind of orders, marching orders, we know what our plan is, July 1st, it's an approved budget. We continue on with the projects that we've been working on, we'll reassign staff to the new projects, and then things happen in the middle of the year, like you just heard about the sewer main break. That has taken a bunch of staff time. And money, obviously. And then other things that have happened just this year, we had a request by Parks to redo the soccer field in North Davis because it's just been worn over time and it's no longer really playable. There's divots and don't want anybody to break an ankle. So we're looking at redoing that field because the soccer field in South Davis, we're losing one field to the new Walnut Park Library that the county's putting in. So we're starting to work on that. We installed the art piece in Sycamore Park, so that was an unplanned project that took quite a bit of staff time. That's completed. I just talked about the sewer main break. And then police generator and transfer switch. That's something that the police probably had been thinking about, and just when we did the 2-year budget cycle last time, they weren't ready to put it on the list. But it's getting to that point where the generator's very old and they're getting nervous about it, so they wanted to get started. So that was a mid-year CIP. So those are things that pop up that we hadn't planned on. So that keeps us very busy. Any questions about that process before I kind of go into this next section?
I think similar to Leslie's question, is this sortable in any way? So, and it would need different metadata maybe, but sort of, we have sort of mission, the city council has missions for statements for Davis, categorize them, where's the money going for parks and recreation, where's the money going for roads, where's the money going for art? Is that an output or potential output?
I think do we break it up? We did years ago. I can't remember if we still do that. We used to break out the CIPs in different ways, and I think we used to state how much money was going into parks and all the different asset groups. So that's something that we could do if we're not currently doing it.
And then do something similar with the general fund, where the money comes in, where the money goes.
Right.
But with the capital budget, maybe there's an opportunity to do something similar.
I think we do that, but we can certainly.
So the pages, or the sample of the page you're looking at, actually provides you with the information what fund is paying for it. So if it's a gas tax money, everyone who drives a car pays towards it, right? And we get an allocation that goes towards the projects that are listed on the gas tax. In your case, I think you're looking at Fund 12. Those are all general fund funded. So meaning either we receive some sort of fees sometimes that are very specific to capital projects, or general fund literally contributes the money to pay for projects, and you have a list of projects there. So each individual fund type, because we have to track them separately, it's a specific bucket that may be restricted, or usually is restricted, except for general fund. So, and then it identifies what projects it's paying for and how much, because that's why we have, so pavement is a good example that Diana is going to be talking about. It's a huge project overall, and it's funded by multiple sources. So you can look at it and see we're spending $16 million, but the question is, okay, where is it coming from over a 2-year period? And so that identifies for that project what are the funding sources are. So when we do, to answer the question also, when we do a budget and brief, what we try to do is combine the components on the budget and brief page that says this is how much is allocated to parks or wastewater utilities, streets and roads. So it identifies citywide, not general fund alone, but citywide, how much money is being attributed to it.
Any other questions on that?
I have a few, can I ask a few here? I just want to double check, so on, just for my own edification, on slide 4, you have the email out to the asset groups, and included in there is fleet and roads and all the other groups. Do they all have equal weight in terms of going forward with the projects? I mean, are they all, there's no set-in rule to favor?
There's really not. I think it goes back to what I spoke about earlier. It really depends on the need. If it's a safety issue, those come first. I think it just depends on what the severity of the need is.
I work with over 1,000 engineers, so I respect what you have to do, but how much of this do you believe is engineering recommendation, how much of it just policy? If the engineers say, we need this now, is that still subject to change of policy, or how does the process work?
I think, again, it's a combination. I think that when the engineers recommend based on, safety or structural need, I think that's taken into account, absolutely, when decisions are being made. I think that, again, we have really too many projects for the amount of staff that we have, and so there's a need to prioritize. So I do think it's a combination.
Yeah, that actually raised another question for me. Do you do any of the internal design work, or is that all through consultants?
We do some, but we have really turned into project managers more than engineers. We spend a lot of time reviewing what our design consultants do, and of course, so you have to definitely have done it yourself at least once or twice to understand how to review those plans. But we have a couple engineers who do some of our smaller projects.
This is an issue with any public agency, but do you feel you have the technical capacity to do design review, or do we need more of that too? To do review of the consultants' work. Do we have enough folks that are project managers and can have enough
All of my
expertise?
project managers are professional engineers.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you have enough personnel, do you think, to cover what's being asked of you?
No.
No.
Yeah, I did a quick look at the list of projects that I have printed out from our database, and some of our projects might be the same CIP number, but we actually put them out as separate packages because there's so much to do. So there might be different phases, or like for the roads one, a lot of times we'll put out a package for the shared use paths separately from the streets because it's different work. And so we had 74 projects, and I have 5 engineers.
5 engineers.
That's way too many
Some
projects.
public agencies are so short-handed, they have consultants being the project manager consultants. Do we have any of that?
I have one project where we have used our consultants more to help manage the project, but I'm in every meeting, so it's just I don't have the time to keep up with the details.
So I gather that's permitted by city policy. There's no restriction on using, because some organizations, they frown on that, right? There's a danger there in terms of.
I don't know that there's
Conflicting
actual, policy restrictions. We
Okay.
try to avoid it. I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah,
So we really try not to do that.
okay. I just have one more question. Thanks for that. I mean, that's something that, by the way, the commission could look into, or somebody could look into, is that could be a policy opportunity. I'm just curious, the last one you mentioned was the police department generator and transfer switch. So that emerged as an emergency project, the way I see that mid-year project. I also see from 2023, 2024, looks like the city hall had emergency generation also added to it. Am I reading that right? So police had the same issue, but it came more as an emergency, where City Hall actually had it as one of the CIPs.
Yeah, the project for City Hall had been put in with the normal process because it was identified early on. And again, I think that with the police department, I think they knew it was coming. It just, they didn't have funding or time to put it in the two-year budget process 2 years ago. And as that generator is what operates, if all the power goes out in Davis, that operates 911 for us. So
Yeah,
it
so it's
can't
an
fail.
important
Yeah, so I
generator.
think, and I can't remember the specifics, I don't know if they had some issues with it. We do test our generators on a very regular basis, so there might have been something with the testing that identified that it was a little more scary than they had anticipated.
Thank you, Chair, thank you.
Okay, so our payment management program, you'll hear it referred to as the PMP. So the Public Works staff selects a consultant to develop the plan. We'll do an RFP process, or we'll use one of our on-call consultants. The consultant does what's called a pavement condition index survey. This is basically a lot of cameras on a truck that drive all around Davis, and then they have similar equipment for a unit that can go on our shared use paths. I think this year they did use a bike to the shared use paths. I think before, on other years they've had to use vehicles, but I think they have the equipment now on a bike. So that so then we get a list of what this pavement condition index looks like for every street and every bike path. And then they take that data and develop a decision tree with Public Works staff. And the things that we look at to go into that tree are maintenance records. So what our actual maintenance staff has gone out and, maybe there's a street where they just keep on going back to fill potholes. So we'll look at all those maintenance records. We'll look at customer requests and concerns. We get a lot of calls from the public, letting us know about a road situation or complaining about something. We do have a GIS there with all of our bus routes, so we prioritize those. We want to make sure our bus routes are taken care of. We look at our safe routes to schools. We look at proximity to emergency services. And then we also look at the upcoming CIP and development work. Sometimes there'll be a capital project that wasn't necessarily going to take care of a street, but because they're on a road that we know we need to get to eventually anyway, we might tag that portion of the street onto the end of that CIP project, so that we don't want to do it beforehand because we don't want to drag a bunch of heavy construction trucks on brand new pavement over and over again every day. So sometimes we try to hold off on the pavement rehabilitation and add it to the end of the project. And then we look at what funding is available. I'll show you a chart that we came up with the last City Council Pavement Subcommittee. And then we share that funding with the consultant, and they put it into their scenarios. And then they prepare a draft report for council, and then we staff looks at the report, make sure there's no concerns or questions, and then the final report is taken to council on a regular item so that they can have a presentation and do discussion on it. So what is a PMP? It's the city's overall program that plans maintenance and repair of pavement surfaces of streets and pathways. So there's 4 main questions that we try to answer with the plan. What streets and paths does the city own and maintain? So with new development, we add streets. So for the Brenton Woods project, we'll be adding streets to our system and some pathways. And then we look at what condition they're in. So that's that PCI, Pavement Condition Index. So we come up with an evaluation of what condition they're in. We look at what repairs are needed and when. So there's different types of pavement treatments. There's slurry seals, which is just kind of the street's not in that bad a condition. If we just put the slurry on it, it'll last 5 more years and not need to be touched. So that's one end. The other end is we have to dig up the street down to the dirt and start over because it's in that much of a failure. And then how much funding we have and how much is needed to maintain or improve the street network. So the components of that, again, the survey, it's done on the arterial and collector streets every 2 to 3 years. And then local streets and bike paths, we do that every 4 to 6 years. And I can tell you since I've been here, it's 3 for the arterials and collectors and 6 for the local streets and bike paths. So we do an updated plan every 3 years. The local streets and bike paths are projected for that kind of mid-year, so we don't have to do the cost of the survey for those areas as often. And then there's a software called Street Saver, and it's a decision-making tool. So we put in the streets and bike path segments, we put in the condition, we look at different types of pavement treatments, we look at our funding that's available and treatment costs, we have to consider inflation, and then we run scenarios on based on different financial goals and pavement condition goals. And then the output is really what becomes our pavement plan for the next 3 years. So staff criteria, it's a bit of engineering judgment in coordination with this other data. And then we do design and construction of the pavement projects once they're in that 5-year plan. So the funding scenarios, so what we do is we look at what our existing annual funding is, and then we look at, well, let me back up a minute. So these are different scenarios that are different approaches to how you would tackle this problem. So we look at just what we know that we've said is our existing annual funding, and so what can we possibly get done with our money? That's basically what that answers, that scenario. Or we could look at an improvement for the target PCIs. So some time ago, council developed what our goals should be for each of these different types of streets and paths. And so 100 is perfect, and 0 is you're walking on dirt. So 68 is not a bad goal. And so that's the targets they came up with. And so that's another scenario. So then the cost might be higher than scenario 1. So maybe if we're really going to get to all of our target PCIs, we're going to need a lot more money. So that's what that looks at. Or we can look at just maintaining our current PCI. Maybe we're nervous about not having enough money, and we know the PCI is not great, but we don't want it to get worse. So that's that scenario. What if we just wanted to maintain whatever came out of that survey data? And then this is always a fun one, we look at what if we could fix everything all at once? How much money would that take? So it's a lot of money. But it is good to look at that. So this table is the funding that was identified by the last City Council Pavement Subcommittee when this was brought forward in 2021. And we were trying to get to this total, we had an identified deficit over 10 years, and we were trying to match this total. So we went from what the current funding had been predicted to be, which was kind of an average every year, and then how can we add to that to really try to get on top of our pavement problems. And so so that's kind of what we're using for our funding scenarios. So we're now predicting these next years, and this is what we're assuming that we're going to be able to use as our base funding scenario. And so the next steps for this cycle, so the survey was just completed. We just met with a consultant to confirm our decision tree. We expect to get the draft report from our consultants in about 2 weeks. And then we have a new council subcommittee, and so we'll meet with them. We've met with them once just to kind of lay out what we're doing. We'll meet with them again to go over the report and to look at the different scenarios. And then staff will bring the report, the final report, to City Council in April or May. And that's the end of my presentation.
Do you have access to cost per mile comparable jurisdictions
Cost per mile for what?
for maintenance.
It depends what scenario you're talking about.
Okay, so maybe we have to put an index into the.
Yeah.
Can the consultant do that?
We can ask, yeah.
Yeah, do we do a good job, or do we have conditions
Well,
that are different?
In the report, the report's online from when we did it last time. You can go in and see, we do have a PCI comparison to jurisdictions around us. We're not doing great, but it is interesting to look at and see how other places are doing. So that's one indicator, but I don't think the report has a cost per mile, but I could talk to the consultants and see if that's something we could do.
Yeah, I think you're right, you do need to put the index in that mix though, so you're apples to apples.
Right. Right.
Any follow-up questions?
I have a curiosity about the PCIs. This is maybe my like lawyer brain that is just thinking about, is there like a number for the PCI at which, let's say like someone gets hurt on like a pavement that's uneven and files a lawsuit against the city? Is there like a minimum number that clears the city of liability? I don't know how that's how that works.
No.
Okay.
I wish it was that easy.
My turn?
Sure.
Okay. I have a few questions. I'm trying to make sure I shouldn't be as alarmed as I feel right now. So I'm looking at slide 16, and you have the existing annual funding, 7.4 million for streets, 1.6 million for bike paths, so you have a total of 9. Should that number, I'm trying to find it, should that be number show up someplace in the next slide where you have on the second row current funding available?
So are you talking about, which
Yeah,
slide are you talking about?
So I'm on slide 16, and I'm just trying to make the connection. I'm not making it, so I'm sure it's there. You have existing annual funding, and it's average funding from 2930, and then it has streets 7.4, bike paths 1.6. Do you see that?
Yeah, so what I was trying to do is show that this table doesn't go out that far.
So this is off the table.
Yeah,
Okay,
so I was trying to give you an idea of what we're gonna be putting in our report.
okay. And then since we're on slide 16, then I want to go to the next slide. The fix everything unconstrained budget, is that the city's wildest dreams? Yeah, idea, right? And that's not actually even reflected in the next slide where you have different paths. I don't see the wildest dreams path in there.
It's not, so, I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but it looks at if we could do it all this year, how much would it take?
Yeah.
And it's an interesting number because it's frankly not even doable, right? We don't have staff time. We couldn't possibly block all the streets off at once for the city. It would drive people crazy. So
Would you have a scenario of wildest dreams where it's not all in 1 year, though, it's spread out up until 2028 like the rest of the year?
Yeah, that's kind of what this is, really.
Okay.
Yeah, and if I could guess, I think the number was close to 35 million if we could have done it all in 1 year.
Hmm.
And this shows when you spread it out, it
I
costs
guess
more.
that was my suggestion. If there is a wildest dream scenario, I think that would be good to add to slide 17, but maybe I'm missing something. So let me ask then another question. So this is the alarm part, make sure I'm reading this correctly. You have the estimated costs in the first row, and that's to bring it up to the PCI targets in the previous slide.
Mhm.
And then you have the actual current funding available, which is projected out to year 2028-29.
Mhm.
And it looks like projecting similar amount available for roads and bikes up until that period, plus or minus a few $1,000s. But what I'm seeing is that we're getting further behind by 2028, 29 than we are today in terms of keeping up with the desired road maintenance, or am I reading that wrong?
I think that we won't really know that until we see this new report that's come out, because this was done these numbers were from 3 years ago. And what we have now is the most recent survey that'll go into the report, and you'll see how we're doing versus where we were.
Okay, so this report is relatively stale, so we'll, so you're gonna get a new report. The reason I come to that conclusion, so looking at that first row, which was projecting out from 2019, it looks like there was desire at that point, more optimism for funding that would have caught the city up and meet those goals, and then that started to deteriorate over time, and I'm looking on the future 4-year period that we're going to be behind.
I think what we were trying to do as we set up this funding scenario for 10 years, we were trying to front load it as much as we can, because we know that taking care of more now is better for us.
Right.
So we were putting as much in the early years as we could, and then just kind of averaging it out for the next, whatever it was.
I see that. I know there was budget stress and COVID and everything else that was factored in later, so I get all that. But it isn't, so I'm somewhat alarmed, not totally alarmed, because I know you know what you're doing, but it feels like losing ground is not a good thing, pardon the pun, for a road maintenance.
Right.
And that's what I see.
Well, isn't it even worse, because it's like painting a battleship. Once you do it, it's coming back. I mean, it's not fixed forever.
Exactly why we have to do the survey
Right.
really fully every 6 years, because if we don't do the survey, we're guessing, right? So we have to reevaluate, because what we thought we would need to pave from the last survey, maybe, we didn't get to it. Now it's like, it has to be done this next year. It's critical.
So my memory is always subject to fault, but that was my sense of things a few years ago. I don't know whether it was 2021, 2020, COVID time, but the sense was, hey, we're making progress, we've got a plan, we've got this under control, and we're going to see improved cities meeting that level, approved roads meeting that target PCIs. And I don't know if you could say that today, so we'll wait till the report comes out.
Yeah, I know, I wish I had the data for you now, because it will be interesting. I think what the indication we got from our consultants, although they were still trying to verify some of the numbers, I think we've done a pretty good job of catching up with our bike paths and not so much with our streets. So I think that.
Is there any chance that this commission could just have not necessarily you come here, but just a follow-up when the consultants come out, or at least we can be informed via Elena or something, so we can see how this actually landed, and then we can decide the appropriate alarm level?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like I said, we'll be going to council probably in late April or early May, so I don't know what the timing is, if you're happy to wait until the report to council's done, and then if you want us to come and follow up afterwards, that might make the most sense.
That would be for the chair of the vice chair, where they want to put it in the calendar. I'd actually like to see it, if it comes out for the meeting in April, then we can provide some input if possible. That'd be my recommendation. If it's after the fact, then all I'm doing is getting alarmed. I can't really make any suggestions the way I see it.
Well, I do want to mention to all the commissioners, once the agenda for city council meeting is posted, you're welcome to look at that, and if you'd like to come over and make comments, you can certainly do that as well. So that, doesn't stop you, and you don't have to wait for a commission meeting in order to do that.
Yeah, I'm definitely aware of that process, and I know it's available. I just feel like there's a commission process that can add value in their strength in numbers rather than having just me as just one voice. All right, thank you.
Hey, so I was wondering, where did the proposed solution money come from? Do we know that, sitting here right now, or is that?
Where does the proposed money come from?
Yeah, the one on the slide, on the third row.
It was a really interesting effort when we did this last time. So we actually had several different departments in the room and looking at possible funding sources. So we looked at impact fees from developments. We looked at some community enhancement funds that had yet to be spent and trying to determine if that was the appropriate to spend on this. I couldn't tell you at the top of my head, it's been a while since we put this together, but it was an effort with finance being the lead of telling us where are some buckets of money that we maybe are restricted, but maybe it makes sense to use for pavement depending on the restriction. So we really analyzed a lot of different sources of funding to come up with the shortfall.
But general fund also. So
Oh,
that's
yeah.
the bulk, that's what, yeah.
Yes,
the bulk.
yeah.
So like the second row, it shows current funding available, and we're in 25, this goes back to 2019. So is that, am I reading it right, that money in the current funding available row, the second row, that's what we've been spending? Or no, we've been spending the total dollar spent, the very bottom row, that's what we've been spending?
It doesn't match exactly for what we've actually been spending. So there was a reduction for pavement work last fiscal year, and so it's been up and down. It hasn't been exactly that exact number.
I'd like to add that this scenario was done in, I want to say 2020, because I think I started with the city as this was kind of sort of going towards the end of it. So that was a projection, and it was done at that point in time. So in 2020, that was a projection. This is what we think we need today based on the report that was done at the time. This is what we need. This is what's available. Where can we identify potential, additional dollars for the shortfall that is occurring? So call it, this was the plan. So we're living it, and the plan, it goes with it, but not necessarily to the same extent. We didn't quite expect necessarily COVID, so that derailed a lot of things, so it changed. Other things that occurred, we don't know what might happen in terms of, call it our expenditures. We didn't know that inflation is going to go up, right? We didn't know we're going to have shortage of materials, which caused increases in prices as well. So this was done in 2020. We live it, and hence it's being updated to see, what we were able to do, what did it give us. So that's why I think it's being updated, as Diana said.
Is there somewhere we can find out what we spent? Is it just looking back over our budgets every year to see what we actually spent? I could just look it up because that information is publicly available. Okay. I was also wondering, do you know what size your staff would need to be? You were saying that the office doesn't have the adequate staff for the capital improvement projects. Would you have any idea? I'm not sure that's something you could know, but do you have like an estimate, like if we doubled our staff or tripled, or it wouldn't really be easy to estimate maybe?
Yeah, it's almost double for actually. So to do projects in my mind well and on time, 5 per engineer is ideal. 7 is doable. I have some engineers with 12, 14, 16 projects. And so things don't get done on time. That's just the reality. We can't possibly keep up with it. So we do our best. We shift gears on a weekly basis for what the current, what's coming in from consultants. There's some projects that, maybe we've already made comments and the consultant's going away and working on it, so we don't have to touch that project for a while. So then we get to focus on other ones. But it just means that staff is really stressed and busy.
And then my last question is, do we know about what this costs us to have the pavement be in the condition it's in? Is there a liability, a certain dollar amount, or is it not something that, this is all new to me, so I don't know, is that something that goes into our calculations, or is something we have to consider?
As far as liability, like I said, we really don't have a way to evaluate that. I think the one scenario where it's like, you have all the money in the world, what would it take to fix it today? That's really the number you want to look at, as far as if we were going to have everything perfect and not have any issues. It's a big number, right? So I think that's the only way I can look at it.
Do we have any scenarios with less cars and therefore less wear and tear on the roads?
We don't consider that because the pavement condition index is really the base data that we're looking at. So it's really what the current condition of the road is in. Part of what goes into that decision matrix, one of the reasons we look at the bus routes is because we know that the buses are more wear and tear on the streets because they're bigger, and so those might need more attention than other streets. That's part of what goes into our decision tree. So it's things like that that affect which projects get forward sooner than others.
Good, well, thank you, Diana, that was very helpful.
Great.
Any public comment? Okay, let's work on the subcommittee updates, initial comments.
One second, let me pull up what I wrote down, what Rick wrote down. Okay, so we concluded our research and we're preparing a memo for review by the commission for the next meeting, and as well as by the council subcommittee members. The memo is going to break down multiple options for different scenarios for socially responsible investing, such as climate and human rights related exclusions or keeping status quo within the investment policy, the feasibility of the implementation, and the impact on our portfolio. And we hope to send this to you prior to the meeting to get input.
I think you will have to send it to us, and it would be a discussion. I don't think you can solicit the input from all the commissioners at this point. So as a subcommittee, you will write it up, and then we will have to present it to the full commission, and you can further discuss, make amendments to the report if need be, or make changes, additional questions, whatever it might be, to finalize the report. So then after full commission gets to discuss it and review and evaluate it as a group, as a body, then you can take the feedback, amend, update, whatever you need to do, and then either bring it back with full corrections, or it depends on what commission decides to, as a full commission decides to do, to finalize it on your own if you need to.
Can we put it on the long-range calendar for the next meeting?
Of course.
You're gonna have a draft ready for the next meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
So thank you for your work on this. We really appreciate it. And also just want to make sure too that I know you've been working with Elena and others that as you put your report together for her, and I know you'll meet with me and with Bapu, just to make sure Elena knows what you're thinking of. So, you know, if there's any kinks that she can help work out, that would be great. And, you know, and I completely echo her comments about, unfortunately, you can't share it, you can share it with your fellow commissioners, but they can't provide you feedback outside of the public meeting, or we run afoul of the Brown Act. So that's why,
Of course.
yeah, so.
Thank you.
Public comment? Leslie, can you talk about the,
Yeah, I can give an update on the town payment assistance subcommittee. Commissioners Garrettson and Shansky are out of town this week, so I will just describe to you. Basically, the stage that we're at is we're sort of still in the information gathering stage. The subcommittee has met with the city council subcommittee to sort of get direction on what areas we want to focus our research on that would be the most helpful to council. So we've met with them. The three of us have each sort of divvied up certain areas that we want to focus on and have been meeting with various experts and gathering information and reports and resources from staff as well as other experts, and we're sort of trying to synthesize everything. So hopefully, in order to get, I guess, to something to the council by the 60 to 90 days, we'll aim to have a draft, I guess, by next meeting as well, so that we can have time to talk to the rest of the commission before we finalize anything, which would get us to 90 days. Right?
And that's not a hard and fast 90 days.
Okay.
That was me being my usual deadline-driven person,
I understand.
suggesting that as a hopeful time to come back to us. And it's a little bit unusual because you're looking at the fiscal aspects of it, and this isn't really Elena's programmatic area. And so Kelly Stackowitz, the assistant city manager, can help too, so she'd be really good.
Yes, she's been sending us tons of great information. Yeah. So we'll, I guess, aim for that with the idea that if it's not enough time, then we'll.
should we put it on the agenda for the next meeting?
So I want to caution you, we have for the next meeting mid-year and Village Farm projects update, which probably gonna take you a little bit of time. So
Maybe we
just
move it
wanna
to-
make sure and kind of manage the expectations, especially if you don't wanna stay here till midnight.
That's totally fair. Would we rather move it to May then, or have it as like?
Well, it sounds like Donna mentioned it doesn't necessarily have to be within 60, 90 days, so that could be possibly something we could maybe move to or propose to add to May meeting. Because our calendar is going to be pretty full through, just want to let you know, kind of heads up, through June, because it's a budget-heavy items, and as you can see, all the utilities will be coming into you as well. And something we didn't necessarily plan on, but it happens, Village Farms, so that comes in. So I just want to make sure there's an expectation for yourself as well, that it might be some meetings may end up being longer, depends on how many items we'll put in.
You're okay with that, Donna?
Oh, yeah, sorry, no, I was just thinking a little bit about the Village Farms, and Elena, I thought typically though, when it came to this commission, it was at a point where the economic analysis existed, but it doesn't exist yet.
It's on, my understanding is it will be by the
Okay.
time that meeting happens. It
Well,
doesn't mean that
okay.
we will get it
All right.
like 2 weeks in advance, but apparently there's a very strict timeline.
Okay, okay, great.
So we'll go May for the loan, down payment assistance. Public comment on this? Thank you. Well, long-range calendar, any comments or feedback other than Elena just gave us, where did we go?
I'd reiterate my comment from the previous item dealing with infrastructure and roads. Because it looks like tentative, the mid-year budget update, it's up to you obviously and staff. Yeah, I would put in that road study if it's available from the consultant, so. Because that'll be a key issue, I think, to look at in terms of the mid-year budget review, what do you do on roads? So if we had that study, we could provide, I think, better input. Now, there are always the option, as I hear, we can wait till we see it at the council and speak for ourselves.
And tell me if this works. Elena, can we put that as a potential item for April, and then when we meet, see if there's enough room for it or not?
Yes, we can do that, and we'll also know if the study is available, because I'm not sure exactly when it's supposed to come out.
All right, thank you. That's all I have on that one.
Any other comments on the long-range calendar? Public comment? Motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second? Anyone opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Last time around, I got it right.
Practice, practice.
Thank you all. I know some of the presenters are all gone over there, but
I was just thinking about like.
That's okay.
ways to encourage like, help with the housing crisis. And I should have thought about more before, and thinking of it, about just